It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the small town of Maplewood. The air was warm and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and the only sounds you could hear were the distant hum of cars passing by on the main road and the occasional rustle of leaves as the breeze swept through. It seemed like just another ordinary day for most people, but for 16-year-old Emily, it was about to take a turn she would never forget. Emily had always been different from other kids her age. She walked with crutches because of cerebral palsy, a condition that made moving around difficult for her. But despite the challenges she faced every day, Emily had learned to carry herself with quiet strength. Her classmates at school weren't always kind. Some teased her behind her back, others stared. But Emily tried not to let it bother her too much. After all, she had bigger dreams than worrying about what others thought. That afternoon, Emily was making her way home after school. She preferred taking the quieter path near the park instead of walking along the busy main roads. This route gave her some peace and allowed her to avoid the crowds. It was also prettier here, with tall trees lining the pathway and flowers blooming in patches along the edges. As she moved slowly, leaning on her crutches, she couldn't help but notice how beautiful the evening light looked filtering through the branches above her. But then, something changed. The peaceful atmosphere was suddenly shattered when 3 loud motorcycles roared into view. They came speeding down the path, kicking up dust and gravel as they approached. Emily instinctively stepped aside, pressing herself against the nearest tree trunk to make room for them. She didn't think much of it at first. Bikers often passed through this area, though they usually kept to themselves. These guys, however, seemed different. The leader of the group, a burly man with tattoos covering his arms and a leather jacket, pulled his bike to a stop right in front of her. His 2 friends followed suit, forming a loose semicircle around her. Their engines growled menacingly, filling the air with an aggressive energy that sent a chill down Emily's spine. For a moment, no one said anything. The bikers just sat there staring at her, their faces unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Emily felt her heart begin to race. Something about the situation felt wrong. Finally, the leader spoke. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. What do we have here? A little cripple girl out for a stroll? He smirked, clearly amused by his own words. His friends burst into laughter, their voices echoing harshly in the otherwise serene setting. Emily tightened her grip on her crutches, trying to steady herself both physically and emotionally. She wanted to say something to tell them to leave her alone, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she stood frozen, her eyes darting between the 3 men, searching for any sign of mercy or reason. There was none. The leader leaned forward, on his bike, extending one arm toward Emily. Before she could react, he knocked her backpack off her shoulder with a swift motion. The bag hit the ground with a thud, spilling its contents everywhere. Books, notebooks, pens, and even a half-eaten granola bar rolled out onto the dirt path. Oops, the man said sarcastically, grinning as if he'd done something clever. Looks like someone's having trouble keeping track of their stuff. His friends laughed again, louder this time, as if they were watching some cruel comedy show. Emily felt tears pricking at the corners approaching of her eyes, but she blinked them away furiously. She hated crying, especially in front of strangers. Hating feeling vulnerable, she knelt down awkwardly, using one hand to balance herself while the other reached for her scattered belongings. Each movement was slow and deliberate, made harder by the uneven ground beneath her feet. As she struggled, the bikers continued circling her, revving their engines sporadically to startle her. One of them even leaned over and kicked a notebook, farther away, forcing her to stretch even more to retrieve it. Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. Still, the weight of their ridicule pressed heavily on, her chest making it hard to breathe. Unbeknownst to Emily or the bikers, a witness had been silently observing everything from across the street. A black woman in her mid-30s sat inside her car, parked under the shade of a large oak tree. She had just finished running errands and was about to drive off when she noticed the commotion unfolding near the park. At first, she assumed it was harmless fun, perhaps teenagers horsing around. But as she watched closer, her stomach sank. What she saw wasn't playful banter, it was bullying, plain and simple. And it was directed at a young girl who clearly couldn't defend herself. The woman's name wasn't important, but her presence certainly was. She had grown up in neighborhoods where injustice was a daily reality, and she knew better than most how vital it was to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Yet even as her instincts screamed at her to intervene, she hesitated. These weren't just bullies, they were grown men riding powerful machines, exuding confidence and intimidation. Could she really step in without putting herself in danger? Her mind raced as she weighed her options. Finally, she reached for her phone and snapped a few quick photos of the bikers' license plates. If nothing else, she could at least document what was happening. Then, steeling herself, she stepped out of her car and crossed the street, determination etched into every line of her face. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let these men get away with tormenting an innocent girl. Across the street, the woman stood silently for a moment, watching the scene unfold. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took in the sight of the young girl on the ground, struggling to gather her things while the bikers laughed and taunted her. The injustice of it all burned inside her like a fire. She clenched her fists tightly, her nails digging into her palms. This wasn't just bullying, it was cruelty, plain and simple, and it had to stop. The woman knew she couldn't just stand there and do nothing. She had always believed that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing was almost as bad as participating in it. Still, stepping in wouldn't be easy. These weren't kids messing around. They were grown men with loud bikes and egos to match. They looked tough, maybe even dangerous. But something about the way the girl knelt there, trembling and trying so hard to hold back tears, struck a chord deep within her. She couldn't turn away. Taking a deep breath, the woman crossed the street, her footsteps firm despite the unease bubbling in her stomach. As she approached, the bikers finally noticed her presence. One of them glanced over his shoulder, smirking, when he saw her. "What's this?" he said mockingly, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Did we attract an audience?" The woman ignored the sarcasm in his tone. Instead, she planted herself firmly between the bikers and the girl, her posture confident even though her hands were shaking slightly. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension in the air. The lead biker raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the petite woman standing before him. He leaned back on his bike, crossing his arms over his chest. "Mind your own business, lady," he growled. "This ain't got nothing to do with you." The woman didn't flinch. She took another step forward, closing the gap between them. "Oh, I think it does," she replied coolly, her eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in her gaze, only determination. "You see, I've already taken pictures of your bikes and license plates." She held up her phone briefly, showing him the screen without letting him get too close. "If you don't want me calling the cops and maybe sharing these photos online, I suggest you apologize to this young lady and leave. Right now." For a moment, there was silence. The biker stared at her, his smirk fading as he processed her words. His two friends exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter dying down as the reality of the situation sank in. They hadn't expected anyone to challenge them. Not here, not today. Most people would have walked past or looked the other way, unwilling to risk confrontation. But this woman? She wasn't backing down. The leader let out a nervous laugh, scratching the back of his neck. "Look, lady, we were just having a little fun," he muttered, trying to sound casual. "No harm done, all right? We'll go." "No harm done," the woman repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You knocked her things to the ground, laughed at her, and made her feel small. That's not fun, that's bullying. And if you think I'm letting you ride off like nothing happened, you're mistaken." The biker's jaw tightened, and for a second it seemed like he might argue further. But then he glanced at his friends, who were already climbing back onto their bikes. None of them wanted any part of whatever trouble this woman might bring. With a muttered curse under his breath, the leader revved his engine one last time and sped off, his tires kicking up dirt as he went. His friends followed close behind, leaving behind only the faint smell of exhaust fumes and a cloud of dust. When the sound of their engines faded into the distance, the woman finally allowed herself to exhale. She turned around to face the girl, who was still sitting on the ground clutching her crutches tightly. Tears streaked her face, but she wasn't sobbing anymore. Instead, she looked up at the woman with wide, watery eyes filled with gratitude and maybe a hint of disbelief. "Are you okay?" the woman asked gently, kneeling beside her. Her voice softened now, losing the edge it had carried during the confrontation. "Do you need me to call someone for you?" The girl shook her head quickly, wiping at her cheeks with the sleeve of her jacket. I'm fine," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for helping me." The woman offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Don't thank me yet," she said lightly, reaching out to help gather the remaining items scattered across the path. "Let's get you home safe, all right? Where do you live?" As they worked together to collect the books, notebooks, and other belongings, the woman kept glancing at the girl, studying her expression. Despite the tears, there was a quiet resilience in her eyes, a strength that reminded the woman of herself when she was younger. Growing up, she had faced her share of challenges, from bullies in school to struggles at home. Those experiences had taught her how important it was to stand up for others, especially those who felt powerless. Once everything was packed back into the backpack, the woman slung it over her shoulder and helped the girl to her feet. "Here," she said, handing her one of the crutches that had fallen during the commotion. "Lean on me if you need to. We'll take it slow." The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together they began walking along the path, moving, slowly, but steadily. The woman matched her pace perfectly, careful not to rush her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Finally, the girl broke the silence. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with curiosity. "You didn't have to." The woman thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Because nobody should have to deal with that kind of treatment," she said simply. "Especially not someone like you." "Someone like me?" the girl echoed, frowning slightly. "Yeah," the woman replied with a soft chuckle. "Someone brave enough to keep going, even when things get tough. Trust me. I can tell you've got a lot of fight in you." The girl blushed, looking down at the ground. "I don't feel very brave," she admitted. "Well, maybe not right now," the woman said kindly. "But give yourself some credit. You didn't let them break you, and that says a lot. Besides," she paused, giving the girl a playful nudge with her elbow, "you've got me in your corner now, so next time you won't have to face anything alone." The girl smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth turning upward for the first time since the ordeal began. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to the woman. In that moment, she realized something. Helping this girl wasn't just about stopping the bikers. It was about showing her that she mattered, that her voice mattered, and that there were people willing to stand by her when the world felt overwhelming. They continued walking, chatting casually as they made their way toward the girl's house. The woman shared bits of her own story, how she'd grown up in a rough neighborhood, how she'd learned to speak up for herself and others, and how she still believed in the power of kindness, even when the world seemed dark. The girl listened, intently, nodding occasionally and offering shy smiles whenever the conversation shifted to lighter topics. By the time they reached the girl's front door, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. The girl hesitated before opening the door, turning to the woman with a mixture of gratitude and admiration in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "Really? You don't have to," the woman replied, giving her a warm smile. "Just promise me one thing: if you ever see someone else being treated unfairly, don't look away. Stand up for them like I stood up for you today." The girl nodded solemnly, her expression serious. "I will," she promised. With that, the woman waved goodbye and stepped back onto the sidewalk, watching as the girl disappeared inside. As she walked back to her car, She couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sure, it had been a tough day, but it had also been a good one. Sometimes all it takes is one person to step in and make a difference. And today, she had been that person. The woman stood for a moment outside the girl's house, watching as the door closed behind her. She felt a mix of emotions: relief that the situation had ended without further harm, anger at how cruel people could be, and a quiet sense of pride in knowing she'd done the right thing. But she also knew her work wasn't over yet. Those bikers weren't going to face any real consequences unless someone made sure of it. And she wasn't about to let them ride off scot-free after what they'd done. Walking back to her car, she pulled out her phone and opened the photos she'd taken earlier. The images were clear enough. The license plates of all 3 motorcycles were visible, along with partial shots of the riders' faces. She zoomed in on one of the plates, jotting down the numbers and letters in her notes app. Then she opened another app and began typing up a detailed description of what had happened, where it took place, what time it was, and exactly how the bikers had behaved. She wanted to make sure she didn't forget anything important when she reported them later. Once she finished documenting everything, she called the local police department. It wasn't the first time she'd made a report like this. It wouldn't even be the 10th. But each call still felt heavy. Talking about injustice always stirred something inside her, a mix of frustration and determination. When the officer on the other end of the line answered, she explained the situation calmly but firmly, making sure to include every detail she could remember. She emailed the photos to the station as well, ensuring there was solid evidence to back up her story. After hanging up, she sat in her car for a few minutes, staring out the windshield. The street was quiet now, almost eerily so after the chaos of earlier. Her mind wandered back to the girl, how scared she must have felt, surrounded by those men who towered over her, laughing and mocking her while she tried to hold herself together. It broke her heart to think about it, but it also fueled her resolve. People like that shouldn't get away with treating others so poorly, especially not someone as vulnerable as the girl had been. But the woman didn't stop there. She knew firsthand how powerful social media could be when it came to holding people accountable. Pulling up her accounts, she drafted a post explaining what had happened. She kept it simple but impactful, describing the incident without naming anyone directly or including identifying details beyond the license plates. She attached one of the photos she'd taken, a shot of the bikes parked near the park, and tagged local news outlets and community groups. Before hitting send, she hesitated for a second, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Would this cause more trouble than it was worth? Could it somehow come back to bite her? Then she shook her head, dismissing the doubts. If staying silent meant letting bullies win, she wasn't going to do it. With a deep breath, she pressed post and watched as the notification bubbles started popping up almost instantly. Within minutes, her post had dozens of likes and comments. Some people thanked her for speaking out. Others shared their own stories of being bullied or witnessing similar incidents. A few even offered to help spread the word further. By the time she got home that evening, the post had gone viral. Screenshots of it were circulating across multiple platforms, and local news stations had picked up the story. Reporters were reaching out to her, asking for interviews, but she politely declined, most of them. She didn't want attention for herself. She just wanted justice for the girl. Still, seeing how quickly the community rallied around the issue gave her hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would send a message to anyone thinking about behaving like those bikers, that actions have consequences no matter who you are. Meanwhile, the fallout for the bikers was swift. By the next morning, their faces were plastered across news headlines, accompanied by calls for accountability. Neighbors recognized them and started commenting online, sharing additional information about their past behavior. One commenter mentioned seeing them harass someone else in a parking lot weeks ago. Another claimed they regularly sped through residential areas, endangering pedestrians. It seemed like the floodgates had opened, and suddenly, the town was buzzing with outrage. Police acted fast too. Thanks to the evidence the woman had provided, they were able to track down the bikers within hours. All 3 were brought in for questioning and eventually charged with harassment, and reckless endangerment. While none of the charges carried severe penalties, the public exposure alone was punishment enough. Their reputations were ruined, and many locals vowed never to associate with them again. Back at the girl's house, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after such an ordeal. That night, her parents had been shocked to hear what had happened. They hugged her tightly, thanking the woman profusely for stepping in and protecting their daughter. The girl herself struggled to process everything. Part of her felt grateful for the support she'd received, but another part couldn't shake the memory of those men circling her, taunting her, making her feel small. It lingered in her mind like a shadow, refusing to fade completely. The woman stayed in touch with the family, checking in periodically to see how the girl was doing. She sent encouraging messages, reminding her that she was stronger than she realized and that she deserved kindness, not cruelty. Over time, the girl began opening up more, sharing bits and pieces of her life with the woman. She talked about school, her dreams of becoming an artist, and the challenges she faced living with cerebral palsy. The woman listened patiently, offering advice when needed and cheering her on whenever she accomplished something new. One day, a few weeks after the incident, the girl decided to take a step toward reclaiming her confidence. Inspired by the woman's bravery, she joined a local advocacy group for disabled youth. At first, she was nervous. What if the other members judged her? What if she didn't fit in? But from the moment she walked into the meeting room, she realized she had nothing to worry about. Everyone there understood her struggles because they lived with similar ones themselves. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Through the group, she met other young people who inspired her with their resilience and creativity. Together, they worked on projects aimed at raising awareness about accessibility issues and promoting inclusivity in the community. The girl threw herself into the work, finding joy in collaborating with others and using her voice to advocate for change. It was empowering, and it helped her heal in ways she hadn't expected. As for the woman, the experience left a lasting impact on her as well. Seeing the girl transform from a frightened victim into a confident advocate reminded her why she cared so much about standing up for others. It reignited her passion for helping those in need, and she started volunteering more actively at community centers. She organized workshops on self-defense and conflict resolution, teaching young girls how to protect themselves both physically and emotionally. She also mentored teens, sharing her own experiences and encouraging them to believe in their potential. Despite their age difference and vastly different backgrounds, the bond between the woman and the girl grew stronger with each passing week. They became unlikely friends, connected by a shared understanding of strength and resilience. Whether it was chatting over coffee, taking walks through the park, or simply texting late at night, they found comfort in each other's company. Both of them had been shaped by adversity, but instead of letting it break them, they chose to rise above it, together. Looking back on that fateful afternoon, neither of them could have predicted how much it would change their lives. For the girl, it was the beginning of a journey toward self-empowerment and acceptance. For the woman, it was a reminder of the importance of compassion and courage. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, there is always light, if you're willing to look for it. The days that followed the incident were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. For the young girl, life felt like it had been turned upside down. She was used to being teased or ignored by her classmates. But this was different. This wasn't just kids being mean. It was adults, grown men, treating her like she didn't matter. The memory of their laughter still echoed in her mind, loud and sharp, no matter how hard she tried to push it away. At night, when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed to pause, she would lie awake replaying the scene over and over again. It made her chest feel heavy, like a weight she couldn't lift. But then there was the woman, the stranger who had stepped in without hesitation. Her voice had been calm but firm, her presence steady and unshakable. The girl kept thinking about how brave she had been, standing up to those bikers even though they could have easily hurt her. What kind of person did that? Someone stronger than most. Someone who truly believed in doing what was right no matter the risk. That thought stuck with the girl, lingering in her mind long after the fear began to fade. The woman, on the other hand, found herself reflecting on the encounter, too. She had faced bullies before, both as a child and as an adult, but something about this situation stayed with her. Maybe it was because the girl reminded her of herself at that age. Shy, uncertain, and desperate to blend into the background so no one would notice her differences. Or maybe it was because she knew how much damage words and actions could leave behind even years later. Whatever the reason, she couldn't shake the image of the girl sitting on the ground, tears streaming down her face, trying so hard not to break down completely. One evening, a few days after the incident, the woman decided to reach out. She sent a simple text message to the girl's family, asking if everything was okay and offering her support if needed. The response came quickly. A heartfelt thank you from the girl's mother, along with an invitation to visit whenever she wanted. The woman accepted, knowing that sometimes the smallest gestures can make the biggest difference. When she arrived at their home, the atmosphere was warm but tinged with sadness. The girl's parents greeted her warmly, thanking her again for stepping in. They explained that while their daughter was physically fine, emotionally, she was struggling. "She hasn't said much about what happened," her mother admitted quietly, glancing toward the living room where the girl sat curled up on the couch. "We're trying to give her space, but it's hard. We hate seeing her like this." The woman nodded, understanding completely. She walked into the living room and sat down across from the girl, who looked up briefly before focusing back on the book in her lap. "Hey there," the woman said softly, giving her a small smile. "Mind if I join you?" The girl shrugged, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Slowly, tentatively, they started talking. At first it was awkward, just surface level, questions about school and hobbies. But as the conversation went on, the girl began opening up. She talked about how lonely she often felt, how difficult it was to navigate a world that wasn't always built for people like her. She shared stories about classmates whispering behind her back or teachers unintentionally singling her out during class discussions. And finally, she spoke about the bikers, her voice trembling as she described how scared she had been. Listening to her, the woman felt a lump rise in her throat. It broke her heart to hear how deeply the incident had affected the girl, but at the same time, she was proud of her for sharing her feelings. Vulnerability takes courage, especially after experiencing something traumatic. When the girl finished speaking, the woman leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "You know," she said gently, "what those guys did to you wasn't your fault. None of it. You didn't deserve to be treated that way, and you certainly didn't ask for it. People like them, they act tough because deep down they're cowards. They pick on others to feel big, but really they're just small and insecure." The girl looked at her, surprise flickering across her face. No one had ever put it quite like that before. "Do you really think so?" she asked hesitantly. "I know so," the woman replied firmly. "And here's the thing. Their actions don't define you. Only you get to decide who you are and what kind of person you want to be. Don't let them take that power away from you." Her words hung in the air for a moment, sinking in slowly. The girl didn't respond right away, but something shifted in her expression. A spark of hope, perhaps, or a newfound determination. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could move past this. Maybe she could find a way to turn pain into strength. Over the next few weeks, the woman continued visiting the girl and her family. Each time, their conversations grew deeper, more meaningful. They talked about resilience, about finding beauty in imperfection, about learning to stand tall even when the world tries to knock you down. The woman shared stories from her own life, how she had faced challenges growing up, how she had learned to use her voice to fight for what was right. The girl listened intently, soaking in every word like it was water for a parched soul. Inspired by the woman's example, the girl began taking small steps toward reclaiming her confidence. One day, she asked her parents if she could join a local advocacy group for disabled youth. She had heard about it through one of the woman's suggestions and thought it might be a good way to connect with others who understood her struggles. Her parents were thrilled by the idea, and within days she attended her first meeting. Walking into the room filled with unfamiliar faces, the girl felt nervous. What if they judged her? What if she didn't fit in? But as soon as the session began, those fears melted away. Everyone there welcomed her warmly, eager to hear her story and share their own. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. These weren't just random strangers, they were kindred spirits united by shared experiences and a desire to make the world a better place. Through the group, she discovered a passion for advocacy work. Together, they organized events aimed at raising awareness about accessibility issues and promoting inclusivity in the community. The girl threw herself into the projects, pouring her energy into designing posters, writing speeches, and brainstorming creative ways to engage others. It gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before, a reminder that her voice mattered, even if she sometimes doubted it. Meanwhile, the woman found herself inspired by the girl's transformation. Watching her blossom from a frightened victim into a confident advocate reminded her why she cared so deeply about helping others. It reignited her own passion for activism, pushing her to do even more in her community. She started volunteering at local centers, mentoring young girls and teaching self-defense classes. She also organized workshops on conflict resolution, encouraging participants to stand up for themselves and others without resorting to violence. Despite their age difference and vastly different backgrounds, the bond between the woman and the girl only grew stronger. They became unlikely friends, connected by a shared understanding of strength and resilience. Whether it was chatting over coffee, taking walks through the park, or simply texting late at night, they found comfort in each other's company. Both of them had been shaped by adversity, but instead of letting it break them, they chose to rise above it, together. Looking back on that fateful afternoon, neither of them could have predicted how much it would change their lives. For the girl, it was the beginning of a journey toward self-empowerment and acceptance. For the woman, it was a reminder of the importance of compassion and courage. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, there is always light, if you're willing to look for it. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that fateful afternoon continued to spread through the small town of Maplewood. The story of the bikers and the young girl had become a talking point everywhere, on social media, at coffee shops, in classrooms, and even during family dinners. People were outraged by the cruelty of the bikers, but equally inspired by the bravery of the woman who had stepped in. It was as if the entire community had been reminded of something important, the power of standing up for what's right. For the girl, life began to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. Joining the advocacy group gave her a sense of purpose she'd never known before. Every meeting, every project, and every conversation with other members helped her realize that her struggles weren't just hers alone. They were part of a larger fight for fairness and understanding. She started seeing herself differently, not as someone defined by her disability, but as someone capable of making a difference. That shift in perspective was transformative. One day during a group brainstorming session, the idea came up to organize a public event aimed at raising awareness about accessibility issues in the town. The goal was simple: highlight areas where people with disabilities face challenges and propose solutions to make the community more inclusive. The girl immediately jumped at the opportunity, volunteering to lead the planning committee. At first, she doubted whether she could handle such a big responsibility, but the encouragement from the group pushed her to take the leap. Planning the event wasn't easy. There were logistics to figure out: permits, venues, speakers, promotional materials, and endless discussions about how to get the message across effectively. But the girl threw herself into the work wholeheartedly. She spent hours designing flyers, coordinating with local businesses for sponsorships, and reaching out to community leaders to invite them to speak. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon others joined in, offering their time and skills to make the event a success. The woman stayed involved too, lending her support whenever needed. She helped the girl draft emails, connected her with contacts she knew through her volunteer work, and offered advice on navigating tricky situations. More than anything, though, she served as a source of encouragement, reminding the girl to trust herself and her abilities. "You're stronger than you think," she would say whenever the girl expressed doubts. "Just keep going." Finally, the day of the event arrived. Held in the town square, it drew a surprisingly large crowd, far bigger than anyone had expected. Booths lined the area, showcasing information about accessibility laws, assistive technologies, and resources available for people with disabilities. Local artists performed songs and poems inspired by themes of inclusion and resilience, while speakers shared personal stories of overcoming adversity. The energy in the air was electric, a mix of excitement and hope that felt almost palpable. At the center of it all stood the girl, addressing the crowd with a microphone in hand. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, it grew steadier. She talked about her own experiences, the challenges she faced daily, the frustration of feeling invisible, and the joy of finding a community that understood her. Then she thanked everyone who had come, emphasizing the importance of working together to create a world where no one felt left behind. "I used to think I was alone," she said, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. "But now I know. I'm not. None of us are. When we stand together, we can do amazing things." Her words earned a round of applause so loud it echoed through the square. For a moment she felt overwhelmed, not by fear this time, but by gratitude. This was proof that her voice mattered, that her story resonated with others. And standing there, surrounded by people cheering for her, she realized she had found something she hadn't known she was searching for: belonging. Meanwhile, the woman watched from the sidelines, a proud smile spreading across her face. Seeing the girl up on that stage, speaking with such confidence and conviction, filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. She thought back to the day they had first met, the scared girl sitting on the ground, tears streaming down her face, and marveled at how far she had come. It was a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the impact one act of kindness could have. But the event wasn't just meaningful for the girl and the woman. It resonated throughout the entire town. People who had attended left with new perspectives, vowing to pay closer attention to accessibility issues and advocate for change. Local officials promised to review policies and improve infrastructure, while business owners pledged to make their spaces more welcoming for everyone. Even those who hadn't been directly involved in the event couldn't ignore the buzz it created. Conversations about inclusivity became commonplace, sparking a collective effort to build a better, fairer community. Of course, not everything changed overnight. Progress took time, and there were still moments of frustration along the way. Some people resisted the changes, arguing that they were unnecessary or too costly. Others simply didn't understand why these issues mattered so much. But the momentum kept building, fueled by the determination of those who refused to give up. For the girl, the experience taught her an invaluable lesson: that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. She had been terrified to step onto that stage to share her story with hundreds of strangers, but she had done it anyway. And in doing so, she had inspired others to find their own courage. It was a cycle of empowerment, one that rippled outward and touched lives in ways she couldn't have imagined. As for the woman, the event reinforced her belief in the power of community. She had always known that standing up for others was important, but witnessing the collective response to the girl's efforts showed her just how much impact a united front could have. It motivated her to continue her own advocacy work, knowing that every action, no matter how small, contributed to a greater cause. In the weeks following the event, the bond between the girl and the woman grew even stronger. They celebrated their successes together, laughed over shared memories, and supported each other through setbacks. Their friendship had started with a chance encounter, but it had blossomed into something profound. A partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared commitment to making the world a kinder place. Walking home one evening after another productive meeting, the girl turned to the woman with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't shown up that day?" she asked quietly. The woman smiled, considering the question. "Maybe," she admitted. "But I like to think things would have worked out somehow. You're tough, kid. You would have found your way eventually. The girl shook her head, smiling softly. Maybe, she said, but I'm glad you did show up. Because of you, I learned that I don't have to face things alone, and that makes all the difference. They walked the rest of the way in companionable silence, the setting sun casting long shadows across the path. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but they were okay with that. They had each other, and they had a community ready to stand beside them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they were prepared to face them together. Months had passed since the event in the town square, and Maplewood was beginning to feel like a different place. The advocacy group's efforts had sparked real change. New ramps were installed at local businesses, crosswalks became more accessible, and schools started holding workshops on inclusivity. It wasn't perfect, but progress was undeniable. People talked about it everywhere. The coffee shop baristas mentioned it while serving lattes, parents discussed it during school drop-offs, and even kids whispered about it on playgrounds. Slowly but surely, the town was learning to see the world through a wider lens. For the young girl, life felt fuller now. She no longer walked through her days feeling invisible or alone. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Every step she took, even the slow, deliberate ones on her crutches, felt purposeful. She knew she still faced challenges, of course. Some days were harder than others, especially when old insecurities crept back. But she also knew she had tools to deal with them now. The support of her family, the friendships she'd built in the advocacy group, and most importantly, the knowledge that she could stand up for herself. One crisp autumn morning, she woke up early, eager to start the day. Today was special. It marked 6 months since the incident with the bikers, and though she didn't celebrate the memory itself, she wanted to mark how far she'd come since then. Pulling on her favorite sweater, a bright shade of red that always made her smile, she grabbed her crutches and headed outside. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the streets were alive with the golden light of sunrise. It was one of those mornings that made you believe anything was possible. As she made her way toward the park where everything had happened, she noticed someone familiar waiting by the entrance. It was the woman who had changed her life that day. Standing there with her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket, she looked just as calm and steady as ever. When she saw the girl approaching, she broke into a warm smile. "Morning," she said, stepping forward to meet her. "I figured you might show up here today." The girl grinned, shaking her head slightly. "You know me too well," she replied, her voice light but full of gratitude. "Thanks for coming." They started walking together along the same path. They had taken months ago side by side this time instead of one protecting the other. The atmosphere was peaceful now, filled with the sounds of birds chirping and leaves crunching underfoot. Gone were the loud engines and mocking laughter that once shattered the tranquility. In their place was a quiet strength, shared between two people who had faced darkness and emerged stronger for it. "I've been thinking a lot about that day," the girl admitted after a moment of silence. Her tone was thoughtful, tinged with nostalgia. "It's funny, isn't it? How something so bad can lead to something so good." The woman nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Life has a way of doing that sometimes," she said. "It throws challenges at us, tests us, pushes us to our limits. But if we keep moving forward, if we refuse to give up, we often find silver linings we never expected." The girl glanced at her, curiosity lighting up her eyes. "Do you think that's true for everyone? That anyone can turn pain into strength?" "It depends on the person," the woman replied honestly. "Some people get stuck in their pain, and that's okay. They're allowed to take their time healing. Others find ways to channel it into something meaningful like you did. But I think what matters most is having someone to remind you that you're not alone. Whether it's family, friends, or even strangers like me, we all need reminders sometimes." Her words lingered in the air, settling over the girl like a comforting blanket. She thought about how much she had leaned on the woman during the toughest moments, not just for practical help, but for emotional support too. Knowing that someone believed in her when she struggled to believe in herself had made all the difference. And now, looking back, she realized she had done the same for others. Through her work with the advocacy group, she had inspired countless people to speak up, to embrace their differences, and to fight for a better future. They reached the spot where the bikers had surrounded her that fateful afternoon. For a moment, they both stopped, standing quietly as memories washed over them. The girl closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This place used to feel heavy, weighed down by fear and humiliation. Now it felt lighter, as if the weight had been lifted and replaced with something else entirely. Resilience. "I used to hate this path," the girl said finally, opening her eyes and looking around. "Every time I walked here, I'd remember what happened. But now, I don't know, it feels different, like maybe I'm stronger than I thought." "You are," the woman said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Stronger than you realize. And don't forget, you didn't do it alone. You had your family, your friends, and this whole community rooting for you. That's why you're standing here today, not because of what happened, but because of how you chose to respond to it." Tears pricked at the corners of the girl's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of gratitude, of pride, of pure joy. She wiped them away quickly, laughing softly to cover her emotion. "You always know exactly what to say, don't you?" The woman chuckled, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Not always, but I try." They continued walking, letting the conversation flow naturally. They talked about the advocacy group, the upcoming projects they were planning, and the little victories they celebrated along the way. They laughed about silly things like the time the girl accidentally spilled paint all over herself during an art project, and the woman teased her relentlessly about it. They reminisced about the past, grateful for how far they'd come, and dreamed about the future, excited for what lay ahead. By the time they reached the end of the path, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, bathing the park in warm golden light. The girl paused for a moment, turning to face the woman. "No," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I used to think I couldn't change anything, that I was just small. But now I know that's not true. Even one person can make a difference. And if they have someone standing beside them, they can move mountains." The woman smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That's right," she said. "And you've already started moving yours. Don't stop now." With that, they hugged, a tight, heartfelt embrace that spoke volumes without needing words. Then, arm in arm, they walked out of the park and into the bustling streets of Maplewood. The town was buzzing with activity, alive with the energy of people working together to create something better. And as they disappeared into the crowd, it was clear that neither of them would ever forget the journey that brought them here, or the bond they had formed along the way. Their story was proof that even in the darkest moments, light could be found, that kindness, courage, and connection could transform lives, not just for one person, but for an entire community. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, the ripple effects of their actions would continue spreading, touching hearts and inspiring change for years to come. End.